Okay, hello. So how are we all doing? Welcome back, for those of you who are back again. I always ask this, any first timers? We'll see you next time too. So before we introduce tonight's speaker, we're a little bit later than the usual program because there was an event prior to us and we had to kind of clear the decks and restock them. Starting probably next week, I'll put an announcement. Our next talk, it's always bad to advertise the next speaker before we've had the current one, but just for saving the date, it'll be December 1st. It's Chuck Mathers from UT Health, and he's the guy that works with all of the astronaut health, and so there's a kind of different flavour there. So that'll be December 1st. There too, so I'd always like to thank our sponsor, the Houston Spaceport. We have Arturo Machuca, who's becoming what we call in Scotland, we call him a well-kent face, which means everybody knows him by now. What I'm going to ask Arturo to do at the December talk is maybe give a 5-minute update on what's happening with the Spaceport. There's a lot of really exciting things happening. SpaceCom will be between now and then as well, so there'll be some stuff to talk about there. So that's all the announcements for the moment. We've got some good plans for the spring, but I'll leave that to a later date. So let me move ahead with introducing tonight's speakers. You know this series is about everything to do with space as much as we can get in. And so this is a kind of first for us, and it's very exciting because you'll learn some things that maybe you didn't know, and you might get a different take on things you think you already know. So tonight's speaker is Chirag Parikh, who's the Director of the Office of Source Strategies at the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, or NGA. And in this role, he is responsible for worldwide imagery collection operations and adjudicates requirements for all US space-based imagery intelligence systems and works with industry partners to support US civil and national security needs. Prior to that, which has only been, 10 months maybe? 7 months, he served at the White House as a Director of Space Policy for about 5.5 years, Director of Space Policy of the National Security Council, where he was responsible for advising the President and the National Security Advisor about civil, commercial, and national security space matters. Through that, he also chaired interagency policy committee meetings that helped formulate and implement national space policies. Prior to that, he was in the intelligence business as a Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Science and Technology at the National Intelligence Council and an intelligence analyst for space systems at the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. And then this year, he was identified by Space News as one of the 5 space industry game changers from around the world making a difference. And rather unique individual in policy, he actually has a degree in engineering from the University of Cincinnati. So please join me in welcoming the next speaker.
I think I've been forewarned next time to create a shorter bio. So I am so happy to be here. I can't even tell you. This is every one of us. I only need to ask, raise a hand. Every one of us wanted to grow up to be an astronaut. Here we are, an astronaut center. I didn't ask for show of hands, but I love the interactive audience. I reckon it's fantastic here. So, this morning I got to geek out and live the fantasy of going and getting the special access tour at Johnson and just being able to crawl across a module. This is super exciting. So, if this is my penance for having to speak, so be it. I enjoy speaking, but you'll realize quickly that I get off script very quickly. I respond to every shiny object question that you may have. As David talked about my background, I'll just give you the very I was an aerospace engineer, and I only a few years ago, during the New Horizons mission, I met my childhood heroes. Not by name, but by mission. These were people who designed and planned and developed extra deep space exploration missions for the planets beyond Earth and Mars. And that was the most amazing thing to me. And they were like, "You work at the White House, you get to meet the president." Like, "You work at JPL, you get to." And so we had a mutual love fest. And I've always wanted to be a space person since I saw a space shuttle launch when I was in 2nd grade. And I'm just so privileged to be able to have the opportunity to have a career in space. It's not the direction I thought it was going to go, and yet now looking back, it's the exact direction I would love to do all over again. I graduated as an aerospace engineer, and my very first job was in the intelligence community. And that's one of the things that I want to make sure that I talk to you guys about too. We're going to talk about this, and we'll go through this rather quickly here. But I just want to, looking at the past speakers that have come here, understanding that this is, human space flight capital of the world. I want to give you the other optics of what's happening in the broader commercial space world, but also from my perspective, what's happening in the national security space world. You don't get that, and I didn't get that coming out of college or a lot of people in the industry, just to kind of expose you to what else is happening in the space world. So out of college, I became not an aerospace engineer, but a reverse aerospace engineer. People call me backwards, but for different reasons. I worked at a place called the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. And what we did, that organization looked at foreign adversary, potential adversary threats to analyze their air systems, their radar systems, their ballistic missiles, and their space systems, and in my case, their anti-satellite weapon systems. My job was to use engineering principles to be able to use the imagery that I'm getting from the spy satellites, to be able to get the information I'm using from our ground human network, our spies, and try to reverse engineer what the capabilities of a potential bad system, a bad day in space would be for us. So that's what I did for a long time. I ended up graduating up the spectrum where I then led not just that was an Air Force intelligence organization, but also leading an interagency intelligence organization, and I also had, I sat at the head of the table like CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, NSA, NGA, which is where I work now, and a whole bunch of people to be able to put together the scope and answer for the president or the Congress when they wanted a single voice for the intelligence community and what's happening there, right? In January, who knows what happened on January 11th, 2007?
The Chinese ASAT test.
Oh, we had this conversation already. Yeah. You don't count. All right. Yeah, we met earlier today, so, okay, well, congratulations, George. So, yes, he was listening. That's very good. Yeah, so that was a wake-up call, a clearing call, so to speak, for our national security space world. We operated in space as if it were a sanctuary. And things quickly changed, and we've done a lot of things for them. But at that point, I got called to meetings at the White House. The White House, we created the National Space Policy a few years later in 2010. I was helping write the intelligence and national security space part of it. And then one day after we published the policy, my predecessor comes up to me, says, hey, we haven't seen each other in a while, calls me, why haven't seen each other in a while? Why don't you come over to the White House, we'll have lunch. Go to the White House, go downstairs, get some really bad pizza, that's the only thing they serve. Then we go upstairs, I don't get the chef, so that's for the report to people. And then we go up and he's punching the code into the door. He says, oh, by the way, before we sit down and have the pizza, you're going to interview for my job. So that was about the amount of advance forewarning that I had for that. And so for 5.5 mostly awesome, sometimes terrifying years, I was the director of space policy of the White House until this past March when I moved over to NGA to do collection. And in this job at NGA, basically we have a bunch of our spy satellites in space that take pictures of all the things that are happening that we need to know about from a national security perspective. But we also support civil needs as well. My job is to take all those things, work with our partners at Digital Globe, work with airborne assets that are flying all over the world as well, and coordinate all the requirements coming in for imagery to be able to optimize collection on a 24/7, 365 day. That's what we do. That's not what I'm talking about today. So if you have questions, that's the preface. I'm happy to talk and take it on a tangent based upon that. But I just want to let you know that this whole other world of national security space exists. I'll touch on a few things along the way. But the premise of today's conversation is this, is what some of you may have grown up in, is the silos of human space flight as NASA, right? GPS and missile warning and taking pictures from space is the intelligence community, the national security community, DoD. right? And then you got your Intelsats and your commercial companies, and then more recently some of the digital globes and your imagery companies, and that's your commercial sector. Big, huge stovepipes, right? They did things for themselves. Now, some areas we had overlap, right? DoD used communication satellites. DoD and NASA use commercial space launch vehicles. But historically, for decades, it's been major, huge stovepipes. For those of you who know John Logston, one of the best space historians in ever, he can give you the entire history of how these things work. I'm not here to talk about that. Our time is limited. What I want to talk about is where are we now and where are we going, okay? So this is the one historical piece that I'll show you. I stole this from a Science and Technology Policy Institute slide. Basically, where government was. If you look on the yellow on the left-hand side, where the yellow triangles, I think that's yellow, is where traditional commercial space was, where the government owned and operated a lot of traditional space. The government owned and operated things. The government pays up all the upfront costs. The government assumes the risk. The government's got incredible, ridiculous amounts of oversight, and the market risk is basically outside of a single agency. But where we're going now, working with the private sector, is the contractor owns and operates the satellites or the systems. The contractor pays some money up front, it's sometimes a public-private partnership. Instead of the government taking all the risk, now the contractor takes the risk through different types of contracting mechanisms. There's less government oversight because they say, hey, we'll take what we can get because it's going to be a service. You do what your commercial things is, but we're going to buy things from you for government needs. And then finally, the market risk is not just for government, it's more towards, the risk is now towards the market itself. That's a big question mark as we evolve through this briefing here is, what is the market? Is there really a commercial market? You're going to see all kinds of sectors of space happening right now. It's amazing. I don't even think I captured them all in this presentation. There's so much going on. Is this it? Is there more? Is this going to expand? Is this going to contract? For those of you that are working on your MBA degrees, those of you that are working in business, this is an interesting world. You don't have to be anymore an engineer, a scientist, an astronaut wannabe to be in the space business. You could be a pure businessman now who's just trying to figure out how to make an extra dollar or two. And there is so much to happen here. This is an opportunity to capitalize on some of those aspirations as a child. So this is an eye chart, but this is purposeful. Okay? This is probably the busiest chart I'll have. But I want to put everything into one chart. This is where we are now. Remember I talked about those silos of what we have. These are all these different space centers. I'm going to walk you through this slide, because everybody's going to be all over the place. There are certain things, there are overlaps between civil, national security, and commercial space, right? I think we all understand that. Hopefully, because that's what we came here to talk about. But there are some things that are still, to this day, inherently civil. And there are still some things today that are inherently national security. Notice, I struggled. Is there anything at all that is inherently commercial? I couldn't think of anything.
Celebrity.
That's a good one. Is it though? Satellite radio. It's a niche market these days, but all right, fine. I'll put satellite radio in there. Sirius XM has now made an extra $5 next week. So, all right. I'll buy that until I sign a contract with them. Then I'm going to take it off. So, all right. Good one. All right. I now learned something. National security side of things. You have things like missile warning. Last I checked, the commercial industry is not worried about ballistic missiles going over the horizon. Of course, I'm sure that's bound to change somehow. They haven't yet foreseen. Also, signals, intercepts, and so on and so forth. Not inherently a commercial thing, although there's probably some knockings on the doors and rumblings that I've heard about that. So that might change sometime in the not so distant future. And space control, what is that? That's a euphemism that the DoD uses for what's called defensive space and offensive space. So the ability to protect your satellites, the with the ability to deny an adversary the use of their satellites at a time of conflict. Those are not things that are inherently civil. Those are not things that are inherently commercial. And again, I'm willing to be proven wrong on any of these. This is Chirag's own music. Oh, by the way, legal statement. These comments do not reflect the opinions of the United States government or the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. They are all. Oh man, my lawyers would kill me if I not said that. So, okay, now that that checkbox is out there. On the civil side, robotic space exploration. As far as I can see right now, commercial entities or the national security community are not looking to explore Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond for science. Environmental and earth science. I have a feeling environmental and earth science is going to change. I'm just not exactly sure how. We'll talk more about that later. Planetary and space science. Then the one that's really interesting, active debris removal. We'll talk about that one. That one makes my head hurt from many different angles from a national security perspective. But there are overlaps in the civil and national security sector, lower left-hand corner. We have space weather satellites. Is commercial going towards space weather? I've not heard, but again, wouldn't doubt it, just haven't seen it. And planetary defense. Now, I know there's a nonprofit called B612 that's looking at asteroid. Is that considered commercial, quasi-commercial? I'm not sure, but I chose to believe that as a civil national security thing at this point. Moving to the upper right-hand corner. Clearly, Houston's very familiar with commercial human spaceflight these days, and therefore, there is clear overlap here. Human space habitats, obviously the Bigelow module is up on the space station right now. Interplanetary human spaceflight, I put up there because of Elon's statement not too long ago. So put it up there as a potential. Celestial resource mining, where they're talking about the moon, asteroids, comets, whatnot. There are both civil and commercial applications, and of course landers, rovers, and probes. But as you see, and I'm not going to go through all of them on the left-hand side, all these other sectors of space, either we are co-developing them between our communities, or we are co-using them between our communities, right? The Department of Defense uses it, builds, operates, innovates on the GPS constellation. But oh my gosh, who uses it? Everybody uses it, right? For every application you can imagine, from our personal preferences to social media to dating. Everybody uses it for all kinds of stuff now. Even for civil applications, you have high precision GPS receivers in dams to be able to tell whether or not the dam has moved just a tenth of a millimeter. It's that accurate if you develop the right kind of receivers, because it's that important for the civil, for in this case, the Department of Interior. So that's all this cool stuff that's happening. So I'm going to go quickly through some of these slides so we can go to the fun part, which is grill me on any question that you like. And by the way, feel free to jump in anytime. I mean, again, I'm happy to vector the conversation to whoever's got courage. So I don't know why that just happened there. So, okay. Let's first talk about the overlap, or not the overlap. Let's first talk about the unique silos, right? I kind of talked about it already. Space control, right? The Director of National Intelligence in his annual threat assessment to Congress, I can say this at the unclassified level. Both China and Russia are developing anti-satellite capabilities to look at a full range from disruption to destruction of U.S. national security space assets. Per the conversation that I had with the students a little bit ago, here's the thing: our military relies on space. If you were somebody who had to go up against our military, where would you attack? Right? We don't want a war to go into space. We don't. And we're not planning on doing anything to upset the balance. On the other hand, we haven't been prepared in the past, in spite of that Chinese ASAT test. That was the call that woke us up. In the past couple years, the president has invested $7 billion of new money. I think that's the number that they announced, of new money to be able to take up this issue. You look at missile warning satellites, we talked about that. Earth science. I think Earth science, if people can figure out how to do big data and figure out how all that data fits into some kind of commercial model, I just have this feeling that Earth science kind of data could someday be a civil commercial overlap. I just haven't seen it yet. Is it really?
Well, Europe is doing these space solutions type approach and create space data and apply it to. We've got a project on Houston, for example, for AIS and
So it's moving, so I can probably move that one. Again, this is a conversation. This is not the edict, obviously. And then active debris removal. I told you I'd talk about this one for just a second. Oh, this one hurts my head, right? Now, everybody likes ice cream, right? Everybody likes less debris in space. So therefore, the natural solution is we should develop capabilities to remove debris in space. Mission accomplished. Walk off stage. Now, it's not that easy, unfortunately. First, there's this thing called the Outer Space Treaty. And what it says is that your junk is your junk in space. Therefore, if, and there's a lot of small stuff in space, but the real problems for one Nick Johnson, who educated me a lot at Johnson Space Center, he's our U.S. government representative to the International Agency Debris Committee. He educated me this, is the biggest problem are the biggest problems in space. It's the big upper stages. Most of them are upper stages. Whose country has got the most upper stages in lower orbit right now? Russia. So imagine this. U.S. government's got a great idea. We're just going to go up and grab one of these big things and take them down, one after another. Seems great. Except for the fact that the Outer Space Treaty says that that is sovereign Russian objects. We can't do that without their permission. So that's a challenge. All right, Chirag, all right, we won't go off with the big stuff. How about we ablate with some lasers some of the medium-sized stuff to cause it to have a different orbit and cause it to re-enter into the Earth faster? Sounds like a great idea, right? Anybody think about the problem here? Could be a one. Right? How do I know I'm not proliferating this technology? How do I know you're not aiming at this versus this? Yeah, driving me crazy. I don't have a good answer for active debris removal right now. And that's the interesting thing about the policy community. When I was an intelligence analyst, I walk in a room full of politicals, congressmen, senators, four-star generals, and I was the smartest person in the room because I knew what the bad guy was doing all the time. That was my job. But when you work in the policy community trying to adjudicate these kind of issues, it's hard. There's no one really good, clear, crisp answer. All right? You have to pick sides. You have to look at the pros and cons. It's not as easy as that. Okay, the other overlap here, so let's talk about some of the overlaps. Civil and national security space. And space weather, we have the Discover satellite, also known as GORSAT. And space weather, the Department of Defense has a satellite called DMSP, Defense Meteorological Satellite Program. It actually measures the Earth's atmosphere to look for fluctuations based upon solar radiation and so on and so forth. So DMSP discovers out in Lagrange Point, taking beautiful pictures of the moon passing in front of the Earth, but also doing great science in space weather. So a lot of partnerships there. Planetary defense. Here's an interesting one. Right? So what you have here is all the asteroid impacts between 1994. If you can imagine, there is a entire Earth map. It looks beautiful on my slide here. So let's see. Can you see this? Yes. This is North America. That's South America. Here's Africa, and then here is Eurasia right here, and Australia down here. Okay. So that's the Earth, and that's every asteroid impact. These asteroids range from anywhere from 1 to 20 meters in diameter that have hit the Earth. So planetary defense is an issue. We are looking at it. There is if you can believe this, there's a Planetary Defense Coordination Office at NASA. Cool title. But really what they're focusing on right now is just looking for all the asteroids that are going to annihilate us. We still have not yet developed capabilities and technologies for how to mitigate that. But this is an opportunity for instance, the asteroid mission to maybe help out, as well as Department of Energy is looking at what could nuclear weapons potentially do to mitigate this. It's not exactly an Armageddon called Bruce Willis syndrome, but it's something that people are thinking about.
What is the significance of your day and night asteroids?
So that's just which ones were seen at daytime, which ones entered the Earth at daytime, which ones entered at night. But the other significance element of this is based upon the timelines, if you had any, to be able to detect it. Daytime would be much more challenging, right, because you got the sun, and so you would have less, if zero, indications in the morning of that. Whereas at nighttime, you might have had at least a little bit of indications in the morning. But to be quite honest, I just stole this off of a NASA brief just as well. But I know from conversations that it depends on where the asteroid is, depends on how much heads-up information you get. Usually you might get weeks information if it's a really big one, but if you're talking about the ones that are in the single-digit meters, you're going to get 0 to none type of heads-up. Okay, that's one down. Okay. And I have to do at least one shout out to my current organization, NGA. It's not just that we share the development of capabilities. The intelligence community, hello, I'm from the intelligence community, I'm here to help. So we are actually providing data and imagery sets to civil entities. So for instance, we went through the White House and National Science Foundation released an entire 3D terrain set of the Arctic region for science and discovery. We recently provided a lot of information about Haiti, before and after of Haiti, based upon Hurricane Matthew. And we put on websites where that brings in all commercial imagery and puts it into a single data layer that people can ingest to ArcGIS or other tools to be able to make sense of where to put humanitarian relief and so on and so forth. And then we've done support to Ebola. We've done Ebola support when that was a big issue in Western Africa when there was the earthquake in Nepal. So, in spite of the fact that you might not know that we think we live behind covers all the time, there is some work that goes on. In the civil commercial side of things, you have suborbital and orbital human spaceflight. I'm not going to talk too much about that only because it seems to be a natural understanding in this city, of course. But there are obvious synergies between them. The human space habitats, one of the uncertainties that we'll have with human space habitats is simply the fact of what are they attached to right now if it's not the space station? Was the space station stay in 2024? Do we extend it to 2028? Will we be able to do isolated LEO attempts? There's conversation about having cislunar space now with these types of space habitats for commercial purposes. How do you get people out there? Lots of good conversation, and this is an opportunity for the communities to cooperate. Celestial resource mining, right? You have companies like Planetary Resources that are planetary miners looking to go off and gain minerals, but they're also developing other capabilities like in-space manufacturing. So how are you able to take and develop tools in space initially? How are you then in the future able to take water or some types of chemicals and put it together for future propulsion systems that you extract from what you're doing to go off further, so you don't have to go off the Earth's gravity well and be able to catch it. Lots of opportunities there. And then, I think all of you guys have seen the video for the landings and launches for the Blue Origin systems, the SpaceX systems. A lot of this is coming together, and it's a question of bringing the communities next to each other. But also from a commercial human spaceflight, it would be improper of me and our host if I did not at least bring up this map here that basically talks about all of the different launch capabilities that are occurring just in the United States. Look at all these space launches facilities, spaceports, and this isn't. And then you should look at the upper left-hand corner. This isn't just a civil thing anymore. This isn't just a NASA thing. If I lose one of my satellites and I need a responsive space launch capability, could one of these spaceports be able to help me out? Also on space propulsion, how many of you guys know that for the past, 25 years, at least, we've been relying on Russian rocket engines to launch our national security space satellites into orbit? I mean, not kind of Russian rocket engines. Like, we make the Russians build these engines, ship them over to the United States, put them onto an atlas, and launch it into space. Well, the president didn't like that idea, especially when the deputy prime minister of Russia said in May of, 13, that when the Russians invaded Crimea, that if the Americans didn't like working with us, then they can use a trampoline to get to the space station. Can't make this kind of stuff out. So, and yeah, that got our attention. And a lot of very interesting policy, politics, technology, money, resources beautiful conversation for the wonk in all of us came up there. And it's space reentry, right? Who was the only entity that was interested in space reentry back in the day? It was the civil community. Well, now you have the commercial community talking about suborbital flight and orbital flight and space tourism. But guess what? In that lower left-hand corner there, the national security community is kind of interested in that. Who knows what that is in the lower left-hand corner? Say that again? What does it do? What does it do?
That's our
the right
question
answer.
for
I
you.
don't know. Nobody here should know that answer. So that's the right answer. So, right, but yeah, we just passed our latest record for longevity in space. I think we're in 500 and change days on orbit now. And then we bring it back down, do stuff to it, we put stuff in it, it goes up and does stuff. That's all I'm allowed to say. So, but we have to understand reentry. We work with NASA. And this is, by the way, a NASA design. Thank you, NASA. So, yeah, so it's very interesting. Yes, sir. Any question about the lower left? Go ahead.
No. But it did bring something to mind. So, like, if we were to do something, let's say, hypothetically, to some Russian satellite, or capture it, or change its orbit, or even just grab one of these SED rocket boosters, is there some international mechanism by which, which Russia would protest with us, or something like that? Does that exist? How does that work?
Well, theoretically it exists. I mean, it's a great question, and there are ample amounts of the International Institute of Space Law which we could have this dialogue in, because the mechanism is held by the Outer Space Treaty. Now, the question is, if you violate the Outer Space Treaty, then what? Nobody's ever been called out for violating the Outer Space Treaty. And so, what do? Well, when a country does bad things in the United States, what we do is we impose sanctions on them. We designate certain companies or individuals so they can't transact in U.S. dollars. We can do broader embargoes. We can at least demarche them, which is a State Department term for saying I'm very disappointed in you, right? So there's an entire range of things to do. Sadly, the answer I have to give you is it depends. Now, first of all, I would never authorize us to go near any Russian satellite, period. That just seems like bad news. But should a Russian satellite come and do something to us, that would be some of the spectrum. Would we go to war over this? Probably not. But often, and this is a national security conversation here for just a second, often what happens and transpires in space really depends on what's happening on the ground. Right? A lot of my fellow space wonks want to believe you touched one of my national security assets, I'm going to do really bad things to you. But if it's during a time of peace, it may be significantly different than if it's in a time of crisis or conflict. So it really depends. But clearly there has not been an actual enforcement mechanism for something like that you're talking about there. Most importantly, it would probably rile up a lot of debate, hopefully get to some kind of solution in the future. All right, I had to put this slide up for the last minute. By the way, I lost all my slides on the flight down here. So this was like this morning put together, so I apologize for any tactical errors. Here's the world where it's all coming together. It is all coming together faster than I can even talk about. And that's imagery satellites. That's my job right now at NGA, is imagery satellites. How am I going to take all these Planet Lab, I guess they're not called Planet, nano satellites, right? The size of bread boxes, even though nobody uses bread boxes, right? But it's like this big. And these things, I wish I had the video to show you. There's this great, you go on YouTube and look at this video, it's fantastic. It's the perfect nexus of civil, commercial, and national security space. You actually hear a Russian astronaut on YouTube talking about the countdown of deploying these satellites off of the International Space Station, right? And then you see it beautiful, in high definition. You see them tumbling, and you see them going off into the horizon. It's a very beautiful thing. And just last month, my organization gave them $20 million to be able to use their satellites for the better part of the next year. So we can get an image. Think about this. We're going to get an image of the Earth, the entire Earth, every 15 days. And within months, Planet is going to launch another bunch of satellites. Every day, there's going to be an image of the entire, they call it skin of the Earth, an image of the entire landmass of the Earth, every day at the 3 to 5 meter resolution level. What can you do with that? All right? And oh, by the way, it's not just Planet. We have a beautiful partner, Digital Globe. Unfortunately, this did not come out very well on the overhead. They have a satellite called WorldView 3. Right? We're so used to living in our multi-spectral, using the technical term, world, color world, and panchromatic is the high resolution stuff. Man, these guys are looking out places that our eyes can't see. The infrared world. You can extract heat signatures. You can see other things that the normal eye can't see. You got companies like, what do they call it? They used to be called Skybox. Terabella. High definition video from space. Pretty interesting. You got another company called Black Sky Global. Every 15 minutes, half-meter resolution, anywhere on the Earth. Right? I mean, the world is exploding in the imagery world. There's applications galore for USGS, for NOAA, for NASA, for environmental and earth science, for the commercial community. Right? You know what their target is? Target. That's who they want to target, is Target. They want to target Walmart. Because Target wants to know how many cars are in Walmart's parking lot. Walmart wants to know how many cars are in Target's parking lot. That's business intelligence. It's not national security intelligence. That's the business model that they're trying to go after right now. And clearly, needless to say, I might be interested in it from a national security perspective just as well. Oh, well, hello, low battery. This might be bad. I might. Okay. This is nature's way of saying get off the stage, Cheryl. There you go. Moving forward, this was another one that's causing headaches across a lot of different sectors. On-orbit servicing. Right? NASA's done this. DARPA's done this once, all experimental. When I launch a satellite in a geosynchronous orbit, you know what happens when I'm done with it? I dispose it. I put it into what's called the graveyard orbit. That's it. All right? And then I build another $200 to $400 million satellite, and then I put on another $100 to $200 million space launch vehicle, and I replace it up in space. And you guys heard of it. It'd be like you driving a car. All right? And when it runs out of gas, you go buy a new car. All right? Does it make sense? So, some really smart business people said, you know what? If it breaks in space, we have a orbiting garage, and it's going to come and fix it. Or if it runs out of fuel in space, we have an orbiting gas station. And it's going to clamp onto you, it's going to fuel you up, and then it's going to go to the next thing. So you got companies that are developing geosynchronous service, like Vivisat. DARPA is doing robotic servicing. Right? That's our DoD entity for advanced research. Over the past couple of years, you know this where it says DoD GSAT in that picture? I'm not kidding. 2 years ago, that is not just top secret. That is a top secret compartment. That's a top secret picture right there. But the DoD decided to declassify this. That stands for the DoD Geosynchronous Space Situational Awareness Program. Currently on orbit, there are 4 those fat satellites on orbit. And what they're doing, they're basically your marked cop cars. They're going around and looking for anything that's bad in geo right now. Fairly interesting things, can't talk about them, but they're there. And it's kind of, somebody earlier today asked me, how do you deter an adversary from doing bad things in space? Well, how does a cop deter you from speeding? I don't know. Being there, all right? Having a speed trap, having those signs that say camera, 500 feet, you're going to slow down for those 500 feet. So, interesting concept, providing some good data. But it's not just that. You have a company right here in Houston. Adil here is the entrepreneur CEO, if you want to work for him, called Chunda, doing some really great on-orbit space situational awareness kind of capabilities too. It's not just in the DC area, it's not just Silicon Valley, it's happening everywhere. And it's really interesting because this goes back to why it makes my head hurt. What else can you do with those kind of satellites? if I can attach non-cooperatively to your satellite, you can attach non-cooperatively to your satellite, right? So how do you regulate something like that? How do you keep tabs on something like that? Oh, by the way, we don't publish everything that's in the catalog. We don't publish everything that's in space. There are some things that we don't publish. So how do you protect those things from being seen? In-space manufacturing, I think I talked about that already, but effectively you have NASA in-space manufacturing capabilities, developing tools in space, eventually somebody developing entire satellites in space, but also then developing refueling capabilities in space. That's kind of the holy grail. If you can do that, you save a lot of mass going from Earth to orbit. So, last few slides, and then I'll open up for any questions. Here's some opportunities that we have. It's not just the national security community, not just the civil community, not just government, commercial. Remember, you guys know what commercial crew and cargo is, where we've been NASA put competitions and said, hey, we're gonna raise the tide so everybody goes up to a certain point, and then we'll down select from there, down select from that. That allowed for us to have SpaceX and Orbital at ATK to become viable commercial launch providers that can compete against foreign capabilities. Government needs to invest in the development of the private sector, even if it's not exactly that perfect return on investment that we've done in the past. We give you this much money, and we expect exactly this much in return. Another thing, an opportunity for the government people here and for commercial people is look for underutilized U.S. government assets, right? As we take a downturn in the economy, as we use less and less facilities, maybe there's an opportunity to be able to use that and be able to have that. From a space security perspective, an opportunity is, right now, if I only have a handful of imagery satellites in space, they're pretty targetable. If I have 500 of them in space, are they that attractive of a target anymore? Is that a deterrence? So for me, resiliency is a pretty big thing here. And then having more and more companies, more and more entities do this, it's competition to drive down technological innovation, inherently bring down the cost. And that's what it costs, and then also the risk sharing that I talked about before. I'm going to Booker T. Washington High School tomorrow. I can't wait. I have briefed the president on multiple occasions, and I will tell you, I've never been more nervous than briefing high school students tomorrow. So, but the opportunity to broaden STEM education, because it's no longer the specialized thing that only the gifted students in that one classroom that you never see them get to have the conversation. This is across the board. I think I just lost my internet connection. No. This is across the board. I don't know what happened. I broke it. Okay. Clearly. Here's the other thing. In the past, I give you money, you build me a thing that I use. And the government now needs to, and industry now needs to think about it in a different way. I'm going to ask you for services. It's so strange. Let me go back to my intelligence route for a second here. It's so strange because here's where we're going with all these commercial imagery satellites that are going up there. I'm not just going to ask you for the images anymore. I'm going to ask you to do the intelligence of what you're seeing. I'm just going to buy that. That's crazy to think about that. Where in the past, we would take all the data, we would make assessments of it. Now we're asking private entities to do that for us. Building the infrastructure, rocket engines. The Air Force is investing hundreds of millions of dollars doing competition to build infrastructure for rocket engine development right now. We're not going to get, if we invest $800 million, we're not going to get $800 million in return. Only one company, maybe two, is going to give us $400 million worth of value. But this reduces the risk and also raises the tide. And also an opportunity is enabling indemnification in nascent industries. Lots of words. Inherently what this means, let's use commercial human spaceflight, is the fact that the government will not hold new nascent industries responsible for doing some risk in space. In this case, it's commercial human spaceflight. You can only be sued up to a certain point if something really bad were to happen or something like that. So that provides a lower risk threshold for, is that right? Is that the way to say it? Or is it a higher risk threshold? I don't know. It reduces the risk for companies to be able to take some big steps that can help us in the future. So, and then this is kind of the last slide. It's the bad news slide, but it is what it is. Challenges. If the government were to put all of this into the hands of industry, then are we nothing but contracting officers and budget monitors? Where's the skill set within the government to be able to do this? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but these are the types of things that we should think about. Secondly, hey, you had this great idea, you got these venture capitalists to pay money for you, I love your industry, I'm going all in on you. Until you realize you cashed out, you got bought out, and the company that bought you out really doesn't care about it, they just wanted the computer systems. Now what happens to me? I don't know what to do about that. What if the government says, you know what, I'm going to give you a lot of money, you got it, and then one day sequestration happens again, and sorry, I can't give it to you. You don't rely on us. Our policies and regulations. You guys would know right now, and this goes to this outer space treaty thing too. Right now, there's only 3 things that we regulate in space. Remote sensing satellites that are taking pictures of the Earth, the communications, and the launch and re-entry. So, who is responsible for saying, yes, you can go from this geoslot to that geoslot to do on-orbit servicing? Who regulates that? What entity is responsible for that? Who is responsible for ensuring the safety and regulating the safety of commercial space tourism? Of like the Bigelow module, being able to say that it accommodates tourists, so on and so forth. Is it NASA? Are they they're not a regulatory agency? Is it Commerce? Or they don't have the expertise? Well, this is a space hotel. Maybe it's the same people that regulate Marriott and Hilton, right? I don't know, right? I mean, these are the hard things. Government competition. Be careful about this one. I am very sensitive to this one. The National Space Policy, which I adore greatly, says, U.S. government shall use commercial capabilities to the maximum extent practical when such capabilities exist in the marketplace. If any of you guys see the government developing capabilities that replicates things that are already in the commercial marketplace, you need to be picking up the phones and calling everybody that you can about this, because that shouldn't be happening. The challenge is when such capabilities are in space already for the government, and then commercial capabilities come up and do the same thing. Where's the balancing act there? That's a bigger challenge. Talk about the Outer Space Treaty, and then export control policies. Space traffic should have been the next bullet. Export control policies. Here's a perfect one for commercial human spaceflight. Virgin Galactic wants to launch people into space and have them safely re-enter. Okay? What if they re-enter in with their vehicle in the UAE? What if they want to launch out of Sweden or Japan? You can't do that right now because that's a rocket. That's missile technology. So, but it seems so innocent, right? So, again, I grew up in a technical world. I don't live in the technical world. One person asked me what's harder, engineering or policy. I said engineering is easier than policy, if only for the reason that you can actually equate yourself to answers. In the world of policy, there is no really good answer, and that's one of the things. And the last thing is the same deal, space traffic. I didn't talk about like the explosion of LEO communication market. OneWeb wants to have something like 500-700 satellites in space. SpaceX is talking about having like 4,000 satellites in LEO. How do you do all the traffic management or something like that? How do you do deconfliction, collision avoidance notifications? A lot of challenges there. So, but ultimately, these challenges, Chirag's opinion, not on behalf of the government, is these are overcomable. These can be overcome. I think we have the right people right now to be able to think through these things. Technology is going to drive this. Innovation is going to drive this. The industry is going to drive this. You guys are going to drive this. So I will hold off on any further pontification. Feel free to ask questions about this. Working with the president, working with the intelligence community, happy to answer anything that you guys want. I think that's it. I hope. I'll just go with yes. So thank you guys very much.
So just before we get questions. I was a little bit remiss at the beginning. One of the reasons we were able to get Chirag here at this time was thanks to our friend Eddie Jeffrey, who was mentioned under the China Technology banner, but Adil and I have been working this for a couple of months, and so I did a short thank you to you, so I apologize for that. So, questions? Over here. Lewis, did you up, or is it Mrs.?
Is SpaceX willing to relaunch without understanding their accident?
Are they willing to relaunch without understanding their accident? I think that they will take if they don't fully understand it, I think they will take a calculated risk. Because sometimes things happen where you don't have the full awareness of things, but I think that they will do everything that they can to, minimize the risk in the future. I mean, you look at what happened with Orbital ATK 3 years ago, the failure of their Antares rocket then, and then they went through a long cycle to be able to figure that out. I think SpaceX will get there, but even if they don't have the key component, I think they'll minimize all the risk and the redundancies around that. But I can't speak on behalf of them directly, but that's what I'm hoping.
What is the direction of standardization of hardware? In other words, if you're talking about refueling, repairing, I don't understand as a layperson that any of this equipment is compatible with somebody else's equipment because of patents, because of proprietary information, and I don't see NASA, publicizing all their. Here's our docking station, how to make one. Here's our refueling station, how to make one, so that everyone can have access to it. How do you envision that? And then you look at the monopoly, because you're either selling access to your technology or you can't access it because it's like being an Apple user versus an Microsoft.
So that's a good question. On the standardization side, on the on-orbit servicing thing, the NASA technicians are going to be one-offs for the most part in GEO, because that's where most of it's going to happen. Secondly, industry is the one that's going to probably provide the innovation for this, but they are developing capabilities, believe it or not, to do non-cooperative rendezvous, where they'll be able to dock and then have robotic technology to be able to find where to put the ports and everything like that. But that's kind of the near-term solution. The longer-term solution is what exactly you said, which is to go towards standardization. But here's the thing, is that the vast majority of the satellites that are geosurface built right now are usually built by Hughes, Boeing, Lockheed, kind of biggies, or Linea Thales, and they already have standardized buses, because the vast majority of the business is going to come from commercial communication satellites. The vast majority of those are already standardized type buses in themselves. So it's really going to be the on-orbit service folks working with the bus manufacturers to be able to develop that. Ultimately, it would be good to be able to have that, but the business case has to make sense to be able to develop the standardization, and companies have to be willing to work together. But I think that's still a long-term solution at this point, because the industry is nascent. That's about it.
Well, I'm walking up, I'll just ask to take the privilege. On the space debris issue, so can you use like the law of salvage, like we use for the oceans, where you can actually salvage other people's property, and there's some rubric that allows you to sell it back to them, or something like that? I mean, so can you treat the maritime law that's applied occasionally to space related stuff? Is there a lot of law of salvage can be used for this active debris collection?
That is an ongoing debate in the international space law community right now. The going consensus right now is no, but people are trying to use parallels of law of the sea to be able to make that argument. But then the question is what exactly up there do you want to salvage in the first place? Yeah.
How many decades before your non-disclosure agreement expires and you can write a really good book?
I have no idea, but it's going to be fun. Whenever the Obama library opens up, I think they just started releasing the documents from the Clinton library now. So, however far, maybe 20 years. But yeah, it's fairly interesting because, as I was telling some folks earlier today, I got to sit in a very interesting position. Whoever is the director of space policy in the National Security Council gets to sit in a very interesting job, because you get to access everything that's happening in the civil world just because it's something that you grow up and you're passionate about. You have to be aware of all the commercial things going on, and you are responsible for all the things happening in the defense space, the intelligence community space, and the international space. So you really get this really thin layer view of everything that's going on, and it's fairly spectacular, to be quite honest.
And to follow up, what's the number one thing, considering all the different types of threats, that we should be most concerned about?
My answer to that is a good question. It's a great question. A lot of very senior people ask that question. And mine is the unknown unknowns in geosynchronous spell. We have a lot of very valuable things out in geo, and we need to have proper situational awareness to know what's going on out there. And sometimes things that go bump in the dark are not necessarily random.
As you are here in the center of NASA's human spaceflight community, I'm wondering what role you think the continuous presence of humans in space, on the moon, asteroids, or other planets plays in context to national and space security.
My favorite question, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe in human spaceflight more than anybody. It's not just because I grew up wanting to be an astronaut like everybody else. I said this, actually I said this at International Space University 2 years ago. Adil was there. And I got into an argument with one of the students who was a very, space is pristine, and I'm saying space is kind of dirty. I said, and NASA is nothing but a foreign policy tool, and everybody's like, right? But to me, and I didn't really mean it that way. I was just trying to get a reaction. But to me, is this: it is a foreign policy tool. It is a show of national strength. It is an element of international cooperation that enables not just space diplomacy, but diplomacy writ large. And you look at the cooperation that we have such a great working relationship with the Japanese. And anytime that we have, and it's not just space people, but anytime that we and the government of Japan talk, often the conversation goes, look at how wonderful we're cooperating in space. So there is so much beauty in being able to do this. And I personally believe, and I won't go into the details because I'll probably get crucified, is that we need to expand our human spaceflight cooperation beyond just
Is part of the reason we're having trouble working out, cleaning up some of the scrap between the different governments is that some of the scrap's not actually scrap?
Next question.
Thinking about cooperation with China in particular, possibility of developing a cooperative relationship like we have with Canada or Europe, the opportunities as well as the problems in that area.
I'm sorry, with China?
China.
Well, first of all, we're legally not allowed to work with China without a bunch of hoops that we have to run through. But the conversation that I had just with some people earlier this morning was China's got some really great capabilities. And if you actually read the law does not say you cannot work with China. It says you can only work with China if you can show that you're not working with human rights violators, you're not enhancing their military, and this is in accordance with like national security practices. And China's got some really great things. And it's not just great things in the sense of like the manned space program, but they have scientific and environmental sensors that are complementary to the world architecture. The ironic part about China is this, is that while we don't work with China, you know who does? Everybody else. And so it's very interesting and difficult for NASA to engage, whether you're talking about a space diplomacy thing or from a scientific thing, to engage in international forums and sit there and look at this beautiful, beautiful chocolate cake sitting on the table, and you can't even eat it because you might get your hand slapped or something like that. So there is opportunity there. We just need to make sure that we follow the law. But I think I'm here to say that the law does not prohibit, but we just have to make sure that we guide around. As a matter of fact, Charlie Golden did or is about to, I don't know, make agreements with China on air traffic control cooperation. NASA, the aeronautics side of NASA, and China, because we can check all those boxes off. So I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question.
Thanks for a great talk. I was wondering if you could address a little bit the role of the United Nations in the future of space. I know that they've been talking about some of the getting opportunities for some of the smaller nations to, or nations that can't afford to enter into space. independently to participate collectively, and I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
That's a very difficult question to answer because the United Nations is, you think the U.S. government is a slow bureaucratic beast. Making things move in the UN is even more challenging. The United Nations does have an office called USA, it's the Office of Outer Space Affairs, run by a person, Simone Di Petto, who used to be head of the Italian Space Agency's Human Spaceflight Program. What is nice about that office is what they are doing is they are doing active outreach to smaller spacefaring nations. They use countries like the United States and Russia and others to be able to convene as convening power, but the real element is this office is to kind of bring in all these other types of nations. And remember, space is not just about putting things in space. Space can be and is more often about applying what is in space to what's happening on the ground. So being able to use, for instance, when the Hurricane Matthew hit, right, where did it hit? Haiti. I would not exactly put Haiti on my top 300 list for space nations, right? But there's an international charter for disaster relief that all the nations that have remote sensing satellites will say every time we're over Haiti, we're going to ping the heck out of it to be able to get information to support Haiti. These types of offices in the United Nations help with the coordination of that, and there's a tangential benefit to this because then those nations realize the power that space capabilities provide them to be able to solve civil and domestic problems.
Sure. If you recall back when the president first came into office, in his first proposed budget that he put out, it was on developing a hydrocarbon boost engine, a technology development program, basically. That went by the wayside, and the only thing that you have now is what is in the DoD budget that has been inserted by congressional members to allow that to happen. While at the same time you have commercial companies who are developing their own launch vehicles and their own engines on their own dime. And so the dichotomy of that situation where the DoD is probably more interested in having what the launch vehicle provides more as a service to provide that capability. So just interesting perspective of how things have changed in the last few years, but also your thoughts on the public versus private investment in launch vehicle and engine development.
So the engine development, the hydrocarbon boost vehicle program, and also the programs in NASA and programs in DoD, those programs went even well before the president took office. They did a lot of innovation, but it never materialized into operational capabilities. So we continue to buy the engines from Russia, and of course, when other companies were then developing their own. What has happened since the Russians made the big threat about the RD-180 engines is that the Air Force and NASA have kind of combined to say, what are the key technologies that we're trying to do risk reduction on? We've brought in all the different companies from Aerojet to SpaceX to Orbital to even smaller companies that I didn't even list up here to say, hey, you get to work on these types of things. We're going to give you these small contracts. And you get the benefit of the technology. You will have the understanding of this that you can take back and apply toward your own capabilities at this point. So I think we've done a little bit of a shift because we realize that we, the U.S. government, are not exactly the best poised to be able to develop these engines. There are clearly unique capabilities that we need to develop, such as the engine types and capabilities for SLS that are unique beyond what commercial has. On the other hand, when it comes to these types of RD-180s or Berlins or whatnot, that's best to give the industry and will facilitate providing the investment up front to be able to kind of lift the tide.
Yeah, could you speak a little bit about any potential national security concerns or maybe overt threats that might be associated with or complicate man going back to the moon and making colonies or such in a big way?
Back to the moon. I'm not sure I even thought through this one. National security threats about man going back to the moon.
Meaning, in the calculus to going back to the moon, let's say, to do some bigger project there. Are there some sort of national security concerns broad-based that might complicate that whole idea?
I'd have to think through that one, but I'll tell you the first thing that hit my gut when I thought about it. It's national security. The answer is, I'm sure there is. I don't know specifically at this point, but here's something that maybe you don't, this goes back to the soft power part of the United States. Foreign policy and diplomacy is national security. And if the United States is not leading, then who is? And if they are, what are other nations then doing? Well, they're probably trying to hitch a ride, they're probably trying to develop cooperative relationships, they're doing R&D together, and so on and so forth. What happens to that R&D? That makes other nations stronger, potential adversary nations, that we would rather not, have the lead. We would rather direct where we want to go. We want other people to follow us. So from a national security risk, I see the fundamental thing being us not being space leaders from a foreign policy angle.
Maybe one last question. We have two more questions.
I hope my question doesn't cause issues, but it is election year. Obviously,
I was waiting for this one.
Yeah, both candidates have expressed or lack of expression of NASA as well as space policy. In your opinion, what's the direction of the next 2-4 years? Every year there's a president change, there's an administration direction change. Congress sometimes drives the direction of NASA, president drives the direction of NASA. So your thoughts on the next phase of what's going on?
So I will refrain from providing my political opinions, but I will make this guesstimate here, is that whichever president comes in, what I've read and heard recently, it seems there won't be any major phase shift at this point. What will likely occur is not from what happens at that end of Pennsylvania Avenue, but what could happen at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, depending on how the Congress turns out. Depending on who gets elected, who's in what power seat, leading what committee on the Senate or the House side. I think that's where you really need to make the biggest focus on right now. And at that point, it just depends. And you look at whichever state wins the chairmanship of those things, and you could probably make a good prediction as to what direction things are going to go. But I don't know. Last question.
Actually, it's two. You mentioned one application of CubeSats imagery, and that seemed very fascinating. What other important, interesting things are going on with these small format satellites? CubeSat, Nanosat, Picosat. I mean, to me, they seem to be the Moore's Law vehicle in space. So there's got to be some cool stuff going on.
There's all kinds of cool stuff going on. Anything from, I'm not kidding, elementary school guys are now developing CubeSats. I didn't even develop it in college, much less elementary school, right? So anything from just fundamental science, STEM-related things, to space situational awareness. Them just having sensors where they're just tumbling and they're being able to do a scan of the dots that are streaking, having the background of the star map, to be able to correlate that against. From communication satellites, being able to develop small swarms of satellites that can have basically it's a Wi-Fi in space type of thing, where then they will be able to communicate to a broader satellite, to space resiliency, countermeasure capabilities, all kinds of. Basically, that one slide that had all the different missionaries. There is nothing that a CubeSat can't do, sort of, kind of well. Then physics and math and all that other stuff comes into the way, and then you have to start figuring out, is it better for me just to build one big satellite and do that, or a bunch of CubeSats at this point? But navigation, developing local navigation accuracy capabilities, like I said, imagery, space situational awareness. It's pretty much whatever sensor you can pack on there. Environmental monitoring, I see a lot of satellites that are doing a lot of environmental monitoring just as well.
Okay, thank you. The other question, I guess the last one, please take off all of your biases and filters. Who do you think is going to put the first survival intentioned humans on Mars? Why them and when?
It will be a government involved in the situation. I have a lot of respect for what Elon is trying to do. I do believe that the government, NASA specifically, has a lot to offer in history, in technology, in the direction that they're going. Whether it's, I don't believe it's going to be purely commercial. But I do believe that there will be government involvement. And I think, I hope, I'm optimistic that it will be the United States government that will be doing that. The question as to when, I can't see it happening anytime before the 2030 timeframe at this point. It has nothing to do with technology or innovation. It has everything to do with money. And being able to make sure that we're able, is it a one-way flight or a return flight? I forgot to ask the question.
Survival intentions. So that means it's more than a crash landing, it's more than bragging rights.
Yeah, but are we coming back or not?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, because currently our intention is to come back.
Right.
Right. So, well, if we go there one way, then I guess if we get there, it's good enough. But no, I think it's going to be in the 2030s at the soonest. Anybody that's in the age of 18 to 22-year-olds, you guys would probably fit the mold for potential astronauts. So, you know, to keep that in mind. Kind of the generation is starting to become really smart about these types of things, and whether they're government astronauts or commercial astronauts, it's going to be fun. But I think the government's going to be involved one way or another.
Okay, thank you.
I'll stick around for a few minutes. I know we have dinner, but I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody wants to ask the question that you didn't want to ask in public.
Well, and thanks for all the questions. I actually just got a text from someone who's watching online who said it was a fantastic speech. Works for a political person, right, Judy? So she may want to call you. Anyway, please join me. It was a fascinating talk, excellent talk.